Once upon a time, a mother's warning. The village of Arimo was peaceful, nestled between golden fields of maize and a river that shimmered under the warm sun. In this humble place lived Mama Sod, a widowed woman who had known hardship all her life. Yet, she carried herself with dignity and wisdom, raising her two daughters, Fola and Tommy, with the best values she could pass down. Tommy, the elder daughter, was the kind of woman every mother prayed for, diligent, respectful, and eager to learn. She spent her days weaving baskets, cooking meals, and fetching water from the river, ensuring the family never lacked. Fola, on the other hand, was different. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with deep brown eyes that sparkled like the night sky and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. But unlike her sister, she was lazy. She despised house chores, refused to learn a skill, and often spent her time gazing at her reflection in the river or gossiping with her friends. "Why should I suffer when I am this beautiful?" Fola would say whenever Mama Sod or Tommy asked her to help with housework. "I will marry a rich man who will take care of me. I was not born to work hard like you, sister." Mama Sod often sighed, shaking her head. A woman must know how to stand on her own feet. Beauty fades, but wisdom and skills last forever. If you are not careful, your beauty will be the reason for your suffering, Fola. But Fola would only roll her eyes and dismiss her mother's words. A chance encounter. One sunny afternoon, Mama Sod sent her daughters to the village market to buy food. The market was always busy, filled with the scent of roasted maize, fresh fish, and spices that hung thick in the air. As they walked down the dusty path, a shiny black carriage suddenly pulled up beside them. The horses were sleek and well-fed, the carriage polished to perfection, a rare sight in the simple village. The window of the carriage slid open, revealing a handsome man dressed in expensive embroidered robes, with rings on his fingers that glimmered in the sunlight. His dark eyes locked onto Fola, and he smiled. "You are a rare beauty," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "What is your name?" Fola felt her heart race with excitement. No man in the village had ever spoken to her like that before. "My name is Fola," she replied, smiling shyly. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman," the man said. "I am Depo, a merchant from the city. I came to visit a friend here, but I see now that fate has brought me to you instead." Tommy, standing beside her sister, felt uneasy. Something about the man's confidence, his wealth, and the way he stared at Fola made her uncomfortable. But before she could say anything, Fola leaned forward eagerly. "A merchant from the city?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Yes," Depo said with a knowing smile. "And I am looking for a wife." Fola's heart leaped. Had the gods finally answered her prayers? Here was a wealthy, powerful man from the city, and he was interested in her. "We must be going," Tommy interrupted, tugging at her sister's arm. "Our mother is waiting for us." Depo smiled. "I will not keep you, but Fola, I hope to see you again." "I will return." As the carriage rolled away, Fola stood frozen in place, staring after it like she had just seen a dream come true. Tommy sighed. She could already see the foolishness dancing in her sister's eyes. "Fola, be careful. You don't even know this man." But Fola only laughed. "Tommy, my days of suffering are over. Did you hear what he said? He wants a wife." Tommy frowned. "A stranger cannot come out of nowhere and offer marriage just like that. We don't know anything about him." "That is because you don't dream big, sister." Fola twirled in excitement. "While you are learning how to weave baskets, I will be wearing silk dresses in the city, living in a big house with servants to wait on me." Tommy shook her head. "Mama will not approve of this." But Fola did not care. She had already made up her mind. Her dream was within reach, and she was willing to do anything to make it come true. A marriage of deception. A proposal too soon. The days after meeting Depo felt like a dream to Fola. He would visit the village often, bringing her gifts, golden bracelets, fine fabrics, and sweet-smelling oils from the city. He spoke to her in honeyed words, promising a life of luxury beyond her imagination. Within just 2 weeks, Depo did something no man in the village had ever done. He proposed marriage. Fola was overjoyed. She rushed home, bursting through the door, where Mama Sod and Tommy were preparing the evening meal. "Mama, my prayers have been answered," Fola announced, twirling in excitement. "Depo has asked me to be his wife." Tommy's face darkened. "You barely know him, Fola," she said. "No one gets married this quickly. Something is wrong." Mama Sod sat still, stirring the pot slowly. Her aged eyes held wisdom beyond the excitement of youth. "Child," she said, her voice calm but firm. "A man who rushes into marriage like a storm does not bring peace. Why does he not wait? Why does he not allow us to know his family?" Fola scoffed. "Mama, you are thinking like a poor woman. In the city, things move fast. He is a rich man, and he wants me. He has no time for village traditions." Tommy shook her head. "Do you even love him, or do you just love his wealth?" Fola ignored her. She had already made her decision. The rushed wedding. Depo did not wait for long ceremonies or traditional rites. Within 3 weeks, he sent his men to the village with a bride price, an amount so large that even Mama Sod was taken aback. "This is too much," she whispered, looking at the gold coins. "No man gives this much without expecting something in return." But Fola had no doubts. Depo had sent for her, and she would answer his call. The wedding was rushed, no elaborate feast, no proper gathering of elders. Just a few hurried blessings from the village priest. Tommy stood in silence, watching her sister dress in the fine silk that Depo had sent. There was no joy in her heart, only a sense of unease. "Sister, please, do not forget us," she whispered as Fola hugged her goodbye. Fola only laughed. "Forget you. When I live in a mansion, you will come and visit me." Mama Sod wiped her tears as she watched her daughter leave. "May the gods protect you," she whispered. With that, Fola climbed into Depo's grand carriage and rode away from her home, forever. The City of Shadows. The journey to the city was long, but Fola barely noticed. She was lost in thoughts of the rich life awaiting her, ballrooms, silk dresses, and servants to tend to her every need. But when the carriage finally stopped, her excitement turned into confusion. Before her stood a massive mansion, dark and looming. Its stone walls stretched into the sky, covered in creeping vines. The iron gates creaked as they opened, and the air was eerily silent. No laughter, no music, nothing like the life she had imagined. Fola swallowed. This is your home?" she asked, forcing a smile. Depo nodded. "You will get used to it." Servants stood by the entrance, their faces blank and pale. As Fola stepped inside, the cold air sent a chill through her bones. Then, from the shadows, a woman emerged. She was tall, dressed in an elegant red gown, but there was something lifeless about her. Her face was beautiful but held no warmth, her eyes hollow as if she had long since stopped feeling emotions. Depo gestured lazily. "Fola, this is Iriti, my first wife." Fola's breath caught in her throat. First wife. Iriti stared at her without speaking, without smiling. Then, she turned and disappeared into the dark corridors of the mansion. Fola's heart pounded. She had never considered the possibility that Depo was already married. Why hadn't he told her? What else was he hiding? The silent house. Days passed, and Fola quickly realized that something was terribly wrong. She barely saw Depo. He would leave early and return late, never explaining where he went. When he did speak to her, his words were cold, brief, and distant, so different from the charming man who had wooed her in the village. Iriti, the first wife, remained silent and emotionless, like a ghost walking the halls. The servants were quiet, their eyes filled with fear, avoiding her gaze. "Why does no one speak in this house?" Fola finally asked a young maid one evening. The girl froze, looking around as if someone might be watching. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Because speaking means suffering." Fola felt the hairs on her neck rise. "What do you mean?" But before the girl could answer, a door creaked open, and Depo entered the room. The maid scurried away in terror, her head down. Depo gave Fola a sharp look. "You ask too many questions," he said. Fola swallowed hard. She had once dreamed of being a queen in a grand city. Now, she felt more like a prisoner in a house of secrets, the hidden truth. The silent nights. Days passed in the cold, empty mansion, and Fola began to feel the weight of her decision. Depo, the man who once charmed her with sweet words, barely acknowledged her presence. He only came to her at night, slipping into the room without a word. No warmth, no love, just a cold, distant man who saw her as nothing more than an object. By morning, he was gone. Fola had no idea where he went during the day, but every evening before sunset, the massive iron gates locked, sealing her inside like a caged bird. The servants continued their strange silence, never making eye contact, moving about like shadows. And then, the whispers began. The whispers in the dark. At first, Fola thought she was imagining things. But as the nights dragged on, she became sure she was not alone in the house. Soft voices floated through the corridors, coming from walls that should have been empty. Some nights, she heard sobbing, other nights, she heard hushed voices speaking a language she did not understand. One evening, as she passed by Iriti's room, she heard it clearly. A woman's voice, whispering, "Run before it's too late." Fola's breath caught in her throat. She turned the knob, but the door was locked. She knocked. "Iriti." Silence. Then, suddenly, the door swung open on its own. Inside, Iriti stood near the window, dressed in red, her dark eyes filled with something haunting. "You should have listened to your mother." Her voice was hollow, emotionless. "Now, you are trapped. Like me." Fola felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Trapped?" she asked, her voice shaking. Iriti sighed. "You are not the first. And you will not be the last." Before Fola could respond, Iriti turned away, refusing to speak further. That night, Fola locked her doors and sat awake, her hands trembling. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The first sign of trouble. The sickness started soon after. At first, Fola ignored it, blaming it on the stress of adjusting to city life. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Her body ached, her stomach twisted at the smell of food, and by the end of the week, she had missed her cycle. The truth hit her like lightning. She was pregnant. For a brief moment, joy flooded her heart. Finally, something to bring happiness into this miserable house. Surely, a child would change things, surely, Depo would love her again once he knew. He had to. That evening, when Depo returned, Fola waited anxiously. "I have something to tell you," she said, clutching his hand. "I'm pregnant." She expected a smile, a sign of joy, a warm embrace. But instead, Depo stiffened. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. And then, in a voice colder than the wind outside, he asked, "Are you sure?" Fola hesitated. "Yes. I am sure." He nodded slowly, then stepped away from her. Good. That was it. No excitement. No love. Just a single word, empty and hollow. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, staring after him in disbelief. Something was not right. The nightmare begins. That night, Fola did not sleep. But when she did, the horror began. She found herself in a vast, empty hall, the air thick with the scent of blood and incense. In the middle of the hall, a group of women dressed in deep red robes stood in a circle, their faces hidden beneath their hoods. Their chanting filled the air, a melody so dark and eerie that it made her stomach churn. At their feet lay a small woven basket. Something moved inside it. Fola took a step forward. She knew, somehow, that whatever was inside belonged to her. Then, one of the women turned to her hood slipping back. It was Iriti. But her face was different, hollow and lifeless, like she was nothing more than a walking corpse. "Your child is ours," Iriti whispered. The others lifted their hands, and inside the basket, a tiny cry rang out. Fola screamed, reaching forward, but her legs would not move. The women began to chant louder, and as she watched in horror, they slowly reached into the basket. "No!" Fola cried. "Don't touch my baby." But it was too late. They reached inside and began to tear the child apart. Fola screamed, and screamed. Until she woke up. Her body was drenched in sweat, her stomach twisting in agonizing pain. She gasped, looking around. The room was dark. But as she turned her head, her heart stopped. Standing at the foot of her bed, dressed in a deep red robe, was Iriti. And she was smiling. The nightmare begins. The horrifying dream. Fola lay frozen in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. Iriti stood at the foot of her bed, her face eerily calm, her lips curled into a knowing smile. Fola opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. And then, everything went dark. Suddenly, she was back in the hall from her dream, surrounded by the women in red robes. Their chanting grew louder, filling the air with an eerie hum that rattled her bones. The woven basket sat at the center again, and inside, a tiny, helpless cry echoed. Fola tried to move forward, but her legs would not obey her. One of the women stepped forward, lifting the baby from the basket. Fola gasped in horror. The baby was hers. Her unborn child. "Please," she begged. "Don't take my baby. Please." The woman holding the baby slowly turned to her, lowering her hood. It was Iriti. Her dark, hollow eyes bore into Fola's soul as she whispered, "This child belongs to us." The women raised their hands, their fingers elongating into sharp claws, and with a sudden, brutal motion, they ripped the child apart. Fola screamed so loudly that her own voice tore through the silence. The painful awakening. Fola's eyes snapped open. Her body was soaked in sweat, her breath ragged and uneven. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then she felt it. A sharp, searing pain shot through her stomach. When she lifted the blanket, her hands came away covered in blood. Her breath caught in her throat. "No. No, no, no," she whimpered, clutching her belly. A piercing cry erupted from her throat, startling the entire household. Within seconds, the servants burst into the room, their eyes wide with panic. One of the maids, Abeni, gasped and ran toward her. "My lady! Someone help!" Another maid rushed out of the room to fetch Depo, while the others lifted Fola carefully, her blood staining the white sheets beneath her. Fola could barely keep her eyes open as the pain intensified. She felt weak, cold, as if something had been stolen from her. And deep inside, she already knew the truth. Her baby was gone. The cold reality. The next thing Fola knew, she was lying in a hospital bed, the harsh white lights burning her eyes. She could hear hushed whispers from the doctors, but their words blurred into a dull hum in her ears. Then she heard his voice. "Is she stable?" It was Depo. Fuller turned her head weakly and saw him standing by the door. His face was expressionless. The doctor hesitated before answering. "She lost the baby." Fuller closed her eyes, trying to hold back the sob that clawed at her throat. "I am sorry, my lady," the doctor added softly. She waited for Depo to comfort her, to hold her, to say something, anything. But all he said was, "Make sure she rests." And then, he turned and walked away. Just like that. As if nothing had happened. As if their child had never existed. Tears silently slipped down Fuller's cheeks. Her baby wasn't lost. It had been taken. And she was next. A sister's worry. Back in the village, Tommy sat by the fire, lost in thought. It had been weeks since she last heard from Fuller. At first, she convinced herself that her sister was simply enjoying her new life. But deep inside, something felt wrong. Mama Sod, too, had noticed her daughter's silence. She has not written. She has not sent word. "Something is wrong," she murmured one evening. Tommy nodded, gripping the edge of her wrapper. "I need to find her." Mama Sod's eyes widened with fear. "Tommy, you cannot go alone." But Tommy had already made up her mind. She couldn't ignore the growing dread in her heart. Fuller needed her. And she would do whatever it took to bring her home. A sister's love and a deadly choice. The unexpected arrival. Tommy stood in front of the massive iron gates of Depo's mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was even more intimidating than she had imagined. Its dark stone walls loomed over her, its windows like hollow eyes staring back. Something felt wrong. The gates creaked open slowly, as if hesitant to let her in. A servant peeked out nervously. "Who are you?" the woman asked in a hushed tone, her eyes darting around. "I am Tommy, Fuller's sister. I have come to see her." The servant froze, then stepped aside, letting her in. The moment Tommy stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine. The air inside the mansion felt heavy. Like something unseen was watching her. A broken sister. Tommy was led down a long corridor, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The servant stopped in front of a large wooden door, knocking softly before pushing it open. Tommy gasped when she saw her sister. Fuller, the once vibrant and beautiful girl, looked like a shadow of herself. Her skin was pale, her cheeks hollow, her eyes sunken and lifeless. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the floor. Tommy rushed forward, kneeling before her. "Fuller, what happened to you?" Fuller flinched at the sound of her voice, as if she had forgotten what it felt like to hear something human. She slowly lifted her eyes to meet Tommy's, but there was fear in them. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "What do you mean?" "Fuller, talk to me. What is going on here?" Tommy grabbed her sister's frail hands, her voice urgent. "Where is your husband? Why do you look like this?" Fuller shook her head violently, her breathing shaky. I can't." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't talk about it." Tommy narrowed her eyes. Something was very, very wrong. And she was going to find out what. A terrifying dream. That night, as Tommy slept beside Fuller, the nightmare returned. Fuller found herself once again in the dark, endless hall. The red-robed women were already waiting. Their faces remained hidden, their voices a low, haunting hum. "You have failed us once," one of them whispered. "There will not be another failure." Fuller stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't understand," she cried. Another woman lifted her hand, pointing towards the woven basket in the center of the room. Your womb belongs to us. The basket began to shake violently, and Fola's breath caught in her throat. Inside it, something moved. Then, slowly, painfully, the lid opened. Inside was not a baby this time, but Tommy. Her eyes wide with terror, her lips stitched shut, her hands tied with red silk. Fola screamed. No. Not her. The women's chanting grew louder. A sister for your future. A sister for your children. One of them stepped forward, whispering in Fola's ear. Make the choice. Give us your sister, or never bear a child again. Fola gasped, stepping back in horror. No. I won't do it. The voices turned sharp, menacing. Then you will never carry life again. Your womb will rot, and you will remain cursed. The red robes closed in around her, the darkness consuming her whole. Fola woke up screaming. The weight of a choice. Her body was shaking when she opened her eyes. Beside her, Tommy slept peacefully, unaware of the horror Fola had just witnessed. Fola turned her head, staring at her sister with tears in her eyes. The choice weighed on her chest like a stone. If she gave them Tommy, she could escape this nightmare. If she refused, she would never have children again. Her hands trembled as she thought about it. Could she betray the only person who had ever loved her? Would she really sacrifice Tommy just to free herself? She buried her face in her hands, her heart pounding. And then, a voice whispered in the darkness. Make the right choice. Fola's breath caught in her throat. She slowly turned her head. Depo stood in the doorway, watching her. His face was calm, cold, knowing. That is how we all survive, he murmured. And then he was gone. Fola's blood ran cold. This was no longer a nightmare. This was real. And she had to decide. Her heart divided. Fola sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness. Tommy was still asleep, unaware of the war raging in her sister's mind. The whispers of the red-robed women echoed in her ears. A sister for your future. A sister for your children. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head. She couldn't. She wouldn't. But the fear was suffocating. Would she leave her life barren? Would she suffer forever in this cursed house? A shudder ran through her body. She turned her head and looked at Tommy, her heart twisting. Her sister had risked everything to come and find her. How could she ever betray her? Tommy knows the truth. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Tommy stirred awake. She opened her eyes and found Fola watching her, her face pale, her hands trembling. What's wrong? Tommy asked, sitting up. Fola opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tears welled up in her eyes. Tommy reached for her sister's hands, her voice softer. Fola, talk to me. And then, Fola broke. She sobbed, the weight of the truth finally spilling from her lips. She told Tommy everything. The nightmares. The red women. The curse. The demand for a sister's blood. Tommy's face paled as she listened. You mean to tell me, she whispered, that you almost... No. Fola cried, gripping Tommy's hands. I would never do that to you. I swear it. Tommy exhaled sharply, her eyes filled with pain, anger, and fear. We have to leave. Fola nodded. But deep inside, she knew. Depo would never let them go. The escape attempt. The sisters hurriedly packed Fola's things, stuffing only what was necessary into a cloth bag. Tommy peeked out into the hallway. It was empty. They moved silently, their bare feet making no sound against the cold stone floor. As they reached the main door, Fola's heart leaped with hope. But the moment her fingers touched the handle, A voice rang out behind them. Going somewhere. Fola and Tommy froze. Slowly, they turned. Depo stood at the top of the stairs, watching them like a predator. Behind him, two men, his guards, stepped forward, blocking their only exit. Fola's stomach churned. There was no way out. Depo took slow, deliberate steps toward them, his expression cold. "Did you really think you could leave?" he asked, his voice like ice. Fola's breath hitched. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. "Let them go." Fola and Tommy turned in shock. Iriti stepped out from the shadows. Her face was calm, resolute. She walked toward Depo without fear. "They are not meant to stay," she said firmly. "But I am?" Depo stopped, studying her for a long moment. Then, he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "Ah," he murmured. "Finally, you understand." Iriti turned to Fola and Tommy, her expression soft but sad. "Go," she whispered. Fola's eyes burned with tears. "Iriti, you can come with us," she pleaded. Iriti shook her head. "Someone must take your place." Fola's heart broke. She wanted to fight. She wanted to argue. But she knew this was the only way. Tears streamed down Fola's face as she grabbed Tommy's hand. They turned, pushing through the doors, and ran. They returned home. The journey back to the village was long and exhausting, but neither sister spoke. Fola was too ashamed. Tommy was too angry. When they finally reached their small home, Mama Sod gasped at the sight of them. Fola collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. "Mama, I was wrong. I was so wrong." Mama Sod held her tightly, stroking her hair. "Hush, my child. You are home now." But home did not erase the past. Fola had been warned, but she had chosen greed over wisdom. And now, she would live with the scars of that choice forever. The lesson learned. Months passed. Tommy moved on with her life, eventually marrying a kind-hearted man who loved her deeply. Fola, on the other hand, struggled to rebuild herself. She no longer sought riches or luxury. Instead, she spent her days learning, helping her mother, and warning other young women never to fall into the same trap. And in the dark corners of the village, the legend of the Red Woman spread. A tale of a cursed house, a greedy husband, and the women who were never allowed to live. A warning that riches gained in haste always come with a price. And some prices are too high to pay. The end.